The Last Battle, Book 20. All the members of the clan had stayed up until midnight, waiting for Jock and Tosh to come back from their scouting trip. After that, Macfuss and Hilda had sent everyone to bed. Then these two had waited up all night, praying that Jock and Tosh would soon come back. Now it looked as if the Snagron had trapped them. It was nearly dawn. The first pale yellow rays of sunshine were coming over the hilltops. Hilda was shivering. The fire had gone out and she felt cold. She went across to her chest of drawers and took out her thick, woolly shawl. Macfuss the Buzz looked at the clock on the wall. The time was 5:30. He yawned and stretched his arms.
Well, old girl,
He said with a frown.
it's nearly morning. I think I'll just go and have a quick look round. You never know, Jock and Tush may still turn up. Maybe they escaped somehow. I don't suppose I'll be gone for many minutes.
Macfuss the Buzz stepped out into the glen. Suddenly, a big black rook came flying down from a nearby fir tree. It squawked. Macfuss was so surprised that he nearly jumped out of his skin. He turned to look at the big black bird. It seemed to be quite friendly. Was it trying to tell him something? If not, what did all this squawking mean? Macfuss shook his head sadly and went across to the wall. Slowly, he climbed the wooden ladder and stepped up onto the tower. He stood quietly at the top and looked all round. Macfuss had eyes like a hawk. He could see very well, even in the pale light of dawn, but nothing was moving. He groaned. Ugh! He felt awful. He couldn't forget that he had allowed the scouting party to go down to the Glen of Gloom. He knew he would never forgive himself if the Snagron had caught and murdered them. He was just starting to climb back down the ladder when he saw something out of the corner of his eye. Turning quickly, he strained his eyes to see in the faint light. For a moment or two, he thought he was dreaming. Frowning, he rubbed his eyes and looked again. Far away on the distant hilltops, something was creeping downwards. He counted 3 little shapes. That must mean that all 3 fuzzbuzzes were coming home. Jock and Tosh must have set Don free. They were all safe and sound. Macfuss was so pleased that he did not hesitate. He forgot all about the ladder and with a loud shout came leaping down to the ground.
Hooray! Hooray!
He shouted and went dashing off to meet them. Everyone else came rushing outside to see what was happening. Before long, everyone was running swiftly up the hillside. But Macfuss the Buzz had a very good start, and he was the first to reach them. The 3 friends were in a terrible state. They had been roaming around the hills all night, and they had lost their way several times in the darkness. They all looked as if they were in a daze. Don was first. His nightgown was in rags and tatters. His feet were bleeding badly where sharp rocks and stones had cut into them. He couldn't stop yawning. He was so drowsy he was nearly asleep. Jock was second. He looked as if he was ready to drop. His kilt was torn and dirty, and his pockets felt so heavy. He couldn't see properly. Everything was just a blur. He was weak and confused, and he kept forgetting where he was. The only thing he knew was that he had to keep marching away from the Glen of Gloom. Tosh was third. He kept his hands hidden behind his back. They were red raw and they hurt a lot. The rope had cut into them when he had pulled Don out of the cave. The three friends were worn out. They had never felt so tired in their lives. When MacFuzz arrived, they just sprawled out on the ground. Soon the rest of the clan came crowding round. Between them, they helped to carry the three friends down the hill. Then they all crowded into the first little house they came to, and the door was firmly closed. When everyone had found a seat, Tosh began to explain what had happened. The clan shuddered when Tosh told them about the Todons.
They were big green brutes,
He said in a whisper.
They had purple blotches on their skin, and they had big powerful arms and legs. They were horrible, and they had wet slime and weed sticking to them. They had sharp claws and teeth too. One of them was called Croaker, and the other was called Squealer. They kept fighting each other. I hated Squealer. I think he wanted to eat me.
Then Tosh explained how Jock had made them look for a way out, how they had found the big nest floating on the underground lake, and how they had tried to smash the eggs it contained. He told the clan that they had been chased away by thousands of bats, and that in the end they had made their escape through a small hole in the roof. As soon as Tosh had finished this spine-chilling story, everybody clapped.
We're very proud of you all,
said MacFuzz with a big smile.
I'm sure we all agree that you were very clever and very brave to get away from that bloodthirsty Snagron and those two nasty slaves. But you are all very tired and dirty, so I think that you need a good clean-up and some sleep as soon as possible.
He rose to his feet and spoke quickly to the rest of the clan.
Come on, you lot,
he said.
Firstly, I want 3 bathtubs filled with steaming hot water. Secondly, I want 3 bars of soap and 3 dry towels. And thirdly, I want someone to cook a hot meal for our 3 hungry friends. And I want you to make sure that their plates are piled up with good things to eat. I want those plates to weigh so much that they are too heavy to pick up. And after they've eaten, they must have a sleep, and no one will be allowed to disturb them or to wake them up. Then, when they're feeling better, we're all going back to raid the Glen of Gloom. We're going to sort out that murdering Snagron for the very last time. We're going to teach her one last lesson. Mark my words, we'll make her wish that she'd never set eyes on us. We'll put an end to all her bragging and boasting.
In a very short time, Don, Tosh and Jock had soaked away all the dirt and grime. They had eaten a trayful of food and were tucked up in bed, sound asleep.
Right,
said MacFuzz to the rest of the clan.
I want everyone to keep still for 5 minutes. I've got something very important to say. I've thought of a foolproof plan to get rid of the Snagron. If my plan works, we should be able to drive her away forever. With a bit of good fortune, we may even be able to kill her. Now gather round closely, because I want you to hear every word I have to say.
At the same time as the chief of the clan was saying these words, Croaker and Squealer were standing outside the mouth of the cave. They had come back as soon as it had stopped raining, but they did not know that their prisoners had got away. They were waiting for the Snagron to come along. They were looking forward to tormenting the 3 prisoners. They hoped that sooner or later the Snagron would allow them to play with at least one of the prisoners. They hoped that they wouldn't have to wait for too long. After several minutes, the Snagron came crawling towards them.
Good morning, servants,
she said.
Are my prisoners safe?
Yes, yes, your majesty,
said Croaker eagerly.
We have done our job well. When can we have one of the prisoners to play with? When I am ready,
snapped the Snagron.
Now move aside. I wish to speak to them.
Croaker and Squealer moved quickly sideways, nearly falling over each other in their hurry to make way for the Snagron. When the Snagron reached the tangle of curling branches, she stopped. Her tongue flicked out and her neck arched.
Good morning, my three little jailbirds.
She hissed.
I hope you're feeling fine.
There was no answer. Speaking more loudly, she tried again.
Excuse me, but I said good morning. Didn't you hear me? It's very rude not to say anything when someone asks you a polite question.
The cave was still silent. The Snagron was getting angry.
Are you playing games with me?
She snarled.
Are you trying to make me think that you've gone? Do you think it's a funny joke? You can't fool me. I'm far too clever to be fooled by little boys like you. Come out here, you little cowards, and be quick about it. I know you're in there. There's no other way out. Come on, you can't hide away forever.
There was still no answer. The Snagron's eyes glittered spitefully. Her tail swished. Her jaws snapped.
All right,
She growled.
I've got plenty of time. I can wait here all day if I have to. You won't be so keen to stay in there when you start to feel hungry and thirsty. And when you do come out, we'll have a lovely little game. I can think of lots of super ways to have some fun. I'll start off by giving you all a little hug. How would you like to be squeezed so hard that you turn a deep purple color? You just stay in there for a bit and think about it.
The Snagron turned to look at Croaker and Squealer.
You two can go to the top of the twisty path and keep a lookout.
She hissed quietly.
And make sure that you catch anyone who tries to enter my glen.
The two Toadons bowed quickly, then set off along the path. The Snagron turned back towards the cave. She pretended to yawn, then she lay down by the side of the green pool.
I'm the queen of the Glen of Gloom,
she boasted.
Everything in this glen is mine. I make all the rules and all the laws. You can't fight against me. I'm far too powerful.
She shut her eyes and pretended to go to sleep. Meanwhile, back in the Glen Macfuzz, the chief of the clan had just finished explaining his plan.
Do you all know what to do?
He asked. Everyone nodded. Macfuzz was pleased.
Very well.
He said.
We'll set off this afternoon, so you've got plenty of time to get ready. But there must be no shirking, and everyone must work extra hard. Come on then, let's get on with it.
The clan rushed off. They knew they had a lot to do. By the beginning of the afternoon, everything was ready. Don, Tosh and Jock were out of bed and wide awake, and Macfuzz had explained everything to them. Now they were all standing in the middle of the glen. They were looking at an old wooden cart, which was loaded up with all sorts of things. At the back there was a heap of dry hay. Next to the hay, there were two small brown barrels. Leaning against the barrels were some tree branches with bundles of dry straw fixed to them. The ends of the straw had been dipped in black tar. The branches looked a bit like witches' broomsticks, but they were far too small. Next to the barrels were some sacks and some ropes. There were some tools in the cart too. There was a farmer's pitchfork and some saws, axes and hammers. As well as all the stuff in the cart, each member of the clan was carrying something. Don had sawn down a hawthorn branch and made it into a club. It was short and stout, and he had left the needle-sharp thorns sticking out from it like spikes. Don was still very frightened of the snagron, so he had a lucky charm hanging round his neck to keep him from harm. This was a rabbit paw on a silver chain. Ben was carrying his big blunderbuss. It was loaded with steel pellets. He had made himself an Indian tomahawk as well. This was hanging from his belt. Jock was carrying a powerful catapult, which someone had given him for his birthday. His pocket was bursting with smooth round pebbles, which he hoped to use against the snagron. Angus had a big steel ball on the end of a chain. It looked very heavy. Tosh was carrying a big black poker, which he had picked up from his fireside. Hilda and Windbag were the only ones who were not carrying something to fight with. Hilda was carrying her first aid box. It was full of sticking plasters and tubes of cream. She had even drawn and painted a red cross on one of her old skirts. Hilda wanted to be sure she was ready, just in case someone was hurt. Windbag had his bagpipes. He would play tunes while they were marching. This would make everyone feel much braver. Last of all, there was Macfuzz the Buzz. He looked splendid. He had put on a long scarlet cloak. Underneath this cloak was a shirt of chain mail. There was a gleaming silver crown on his head and a single cow horn hanging from his belt. In his hand he held his trusty dagger. The blade of the dagger sparkled and flashed in the bright sunshine. Macfuzz inspected the clan. He was pleased to see that everyone was well armed. He climbed up onto a rock and spoke as loudly as he could so that everyone could hear him.
You all know why we are here,
he said.
We are going into battle, and we are going to give the snagron the surprise of her life. But the main thing to remember is that you must do exactly as I say. When I sound my horn, you must stand still and wait for my orders. If you do as I ask, no one will be harmed. But for goodness sake, do not rush about in a panic, otherwise you will get yourself badly hurt or even killed. Now, does everyone understand that? That's all I've got to say. It's time we were on our way. Good luck, everybody, and don't forget what I've just said.
And as Windbag played a tune on his bagpipes, the clan marched off, pulling the creaking cart behind them. Back in the Glen of Gloom, the snagron was tired of waiting. She scowled at the mouth of the cave, wondering what to do next. It was a puzzle. Her prisoners should have come out by now. She crawled up to the tangle of branches and gazed into the murky darkness. There was nothing to be seen. She thought that her prisoners must have hidden in the darkest part of the cave.
Very well,
she muttered.
If they refuse to come out here, I'll just have to open up this prison and go in to find them myself.
She arched her neck and fixed her eyes on the tangle of curled and twisted branches. A soft murmuring sound came from deep within her throat. At first, This sounded like sweet singing, but soon it turned into a harsh, growling sound. The growls became louder, and the twisted tree began to bend and sway. She raised her head, and dazzling flashes of blue and orange light came shooting from her eyes. The tree seemed to blaze up in a crackling fire of blue and orange flames. But the tree itself did not burn. Very slowly, the twisted branches began to uncurl and draw apart. Soon they formed a dark archway, opening the way into the cave. The Snagron began to crawl in. Quickly, she slithered towards the first tunnel. Before long, she was crawling into the room full of rotting bones. First of all, she saw Tosh's scarf. Then she saw the pile of burnt matches. Looking at the rocky wall, she was amazed to see a trail of nails leading upwards. Then, far above her head, she saw the rays of sunlight coming through the hole in the roof. 1,000 curses! Her prisoners had escaped. The Snagron was so angry she nearly burst a blood vessel. Her scowling eyes were red and bloodshot, and full of hate. Her mouth foamed and dribbled. Her head shook. Her tail was looping and curling with anger. Snapping her terrible jaws, she looked up at the roof. Very slowly, she licked the dribbles of foam from her lips. Then these awful, blood-curdling words came spitting from her mouth.
I'll kill them! I'll kill them! I'll murder them all! I'll claw out their eyes! I'll bite off their noses! I'll peel the skin from their scrawny arms! I'll wait until they're so hungry they're nearly starving, and then I'll make them eat cockroaches, spiders, and toads. I'll drown them in the deepest part of my pool. I'll build a fire of red-hot coal, then I'll roast their brains and have them on toast. I'll make them pay. I'll torment them for days, weeks, months, and years. They'll moan and groan. They'll weep and wail. They'll cry and bawl. They'll squawk and squeal. They'll croak and gurgle. They'll quiver and quake. They'll squeak and scream. They'll howl and yowl. They'll pray. They'll beg me to set them free. They'll squirm with terror. I'll kill them! I'll kill them! I'll kill them all!
Suddenly the Snagron stopped. Her eyes glittered craftily.
I will rest for a short while,
she said quietly.
And when I feel fresh, I will take Croaker and Squealer with me to the Glen MacFuzz. Then I will deal with the entire clan once and for all.
But the Snagron did not know that there was no need to go to the Glen MacFuzz. The clan were on their way to meet her. At the same time as the Snagron finished speaking, the clan reached the outskirts of the Glen of Gloom. Now they were beginning to creep down the crooked pathway as silently as possible. Suddenly, two ugly green shapes jumped out in front of them, barring the way. Everyone froze in horror. It was Croaker and Squealer. They were further down the slope, standing just in front of the prickly bushes. The two Toadons began to creep slowly upwards. MacFuzz lifted the horn to his lips and gave one short, sharp blast.
Get the sacks out of the cart,
he ordered. Quickly, Tosh and Ben unloaded the sacks.
Open them up.
Commanded MacFuzz. One of the sacks was quickly ripped open, and a sparkling white powder trickled out onto the ground.
That's salt,
said MacFuzz.
Now, open the other one.
The other sack was full of pepper.
I want everyone to get a handful of salt and a handful of pepper,
said MacFuzz.
Then, when the Toadons get near enough, I want you to fling the pepper into their eyes. Save the salt for a moment or two, and then aim it at their skin. Then we'll see what happens.
The clan quickly filled their hands with the two powders, then waited for the Toadons to come closer. As he crept slowly upwards, Croaker began to mutter at MacFuzz.
I'm going to rip you apart, bit by bit. Yes, yes,
said Squealer, licking his lips.
I've been looking forward to this for a long, long time.
MacFuzz waited until the Toadons had got a bit closer, and then he shouted,
1, 2, 3, now!
A cloud of red pepper went sailing towards the two monsters, and it was right on target. It hit them smack in the eyes. The Toadons squeaked and squealed as the pepper hit them. Their eyes began to water, and they were unable to see. They choked and sneezed and clawed at their eyes, trying to get the pepper out, but it was no good.
Right, now for the salt,
shouted MacFuzz. This time, white clouds of salt sailed towards the helpless Toadons. Before long, they were white from head to foot. And now an astonishing thing began to happen. The clan looked on in amazement as the two frightened monsters began to shrink and shrivel.
It works! It works!
Shouted MacFuzz, looking very pleased with himself.
Those Toadons live in water, and their skin needs to stay wet. The salt is drying them out. They won't last long now.
And MacFuzz was right. The two Toadons seemed to simply fade away. Before long, they collapsed to the ground, squirming in pain as the salt burned into their skin. They moaned softly and then lay still. MacFuzz shuddered. He felt sorry for the Toadons, but he knew that they would have killed and eaten the clan without feeling any pity at all. He turned to look at his small army.
That's got rid of the Toadons,
he said grimly.
Now it's the Snagrons' turn. Come on, boys, let's get on with it.
Everyone knew what to do. MacFuzz had trained them well. Big Ben used the pitchfork to unload the pile of hay from the cart. The rest of the clan took armloads of hay down the slope to the prickly bushes. Then they heaped little mounds of hay around the roots of the closest bushes. When they had finished, MacFuzz took one of the funny-looking broomsticks down from the cart. He asked Angus to strike a match and light the straw at the end of the broomstick. This straw was coated with thick black tar. Soon the straw was burning well. Now everyone knew what the broomsticks were for. They were going to use them as burning torches. The rest of the clan picked up the other torches. Without saying a word, MacFuzz went round and lit each torch. Then he strode down to the little heaps of hay. The rest of the clan strode after him. They all stood in a line. Breathing deeply, MacFuzz raised the horn to his lips. A powerful blast, as loud as thunder, went booming across the glen. It woke up the Snagron, who was sleeping soundly deep inside her cave. And as she slithered out to see what was happening, the members of the clan set fire to the hay. A shower of sparks slowly drifted upwards. The fire began to crackle and blaze. Soon red-hot flames were reaching for the sky. The prickly bushes twisted and turned awfully as the swirling flames surrounded them. Some of the fuzzbuzzers could have sworn that the bushes moaned and groaned as they burst into flames. The roasting heat was so bad that the clan had to stand well back. As the bushes burned, they gave off thick black clouds of smoke and horrible smelling fumes, which made everyone feel sick. But the fire did not last long. In a very short time, not one single bush was left standing. All that was left was a little heap of ash and some bits of charred wood. Now nothing could stop them from entering the Glen of Gloom. Dragging the creaking cart behind them, the clan set off down the last part of the path. Looking out from the mouth of the cave, the Snagron was astounded. This was the last thing she had expected. She had been so sure that the clan were afraid of her, but now it was her turn to be afraid. Macfuzz had found the one thing that filled her with terror and dismay: fire. The Snagron was afraid of fire. She had seen the leaping flames as they swirled around the prickly bushes, and her eyes had opened wide with terror. Now, as the clan came swooping down the pathway, she could see their axes and daggers sparkle and flash in the sunlight. These things did not bother her, but the fuzzbuzzers were still carrying their burning torches. The Snagron was very, very frightened. She quivered and quaked at the thought of being burned alive. She knew she had made a mistake, but it was much too late to do anything about it. She watched and waited as Macfuzz and his little army ran towards her. Soon they had formed a ring around the mouth of the cave. No one said a word. They held their torches in front of them and began to move in. The Snagron screamed and snorted.
The fire! The fire! It's too bright! Go away! It dazzles me! It's too hot! It's burning me! Go away! Go away!
But the fuzzbuzzers kept moving in. They would not allow her to escape. Macfuzz the Buzz stepped forward. He stretched out his arm, aiming his torch right at her eyes. The Snagron was in agony.
Ah!
He screeched.
It burns! It burns! It hurts me! Go away! Please! Please! Go away!
But Macfuzz stood firm.
We will not go away,
He said.
We are staying right here. Get back into the darkness, you filthy beast.
The Snagron's head began to droop. Her eyes lost their wicked glitter.
Get back into your cave,
ordered Macfuzz.
Go on, move yourself.
The clan moved towards the Snagron and drove her backwards. She crawled into a dark corner. She knew that it was hopeless. Her head drooped lower and lower. She was all alone. There were no Toadons to help her. It was useless to try to fight against the burning torches. All her plans had failed. She was beaten. Just then Black Angus did a very brave but very foolish thing. On the spur of the moment, he bounded across to the Snagron, shouting,
"Here goes!"
He twisted the ball and chain round and round his head. Luckily, the Snagron's snapping jaws just missed him. Crash! The solid steel ball came pounding down on her skull. The Snagron saw stars. Then she collapsed in a sprawling heap. Macfuzz lost his temper.
You silly clown!
He yelled at Angus.
You could have got yourself killed, you big turnip head!
"Sorry, sir,"
said Angus, bowing his head in shame. Then Macfuzz grinned.
It was a good shot all the same,
He said.
and I'm pleased to see that you're unhurt, though you had a very close shave. Now, come on, let's get working before she comes round.
Big Ben ran across to the cart and lifted down the 2 wooden barrels. Carrying a barrel under each arm, he rushed back to the cave. He put 1 barrel down on the ground, next to the body of the Snagron. Then he pulled the cork out of the top of the 2nd barrel. He tipped the barrel up and started to sprinkle some black powder all around the cave. It was gunpowder. By now Ben was laying a trail of gunpowder from the 1st barrel out into the glen. When he reached the banks of the green pool, he stopped.
Right!
Shouted Macfuzz.
Everybody find a place to hide.
The clan scattered. Macfuzz waited until everyone was well hidden. Then he dropped his torch onto the trail of gunpowder. There was a fizzing sound. Then a bright yellow flame crackled along the ground. Macfuzz ran at top speed and ducked behind one of the jagged rocks. The clan waited. Nobody breathed. Everything was still. Then crack! A powerful blast shook the ground. Very slowly, the towering cliffs and mountains began to splinter and crumble. Jagged black cracks zigzagged down the rocky walls. The clan heard the dull rumble of falling rock. Then whoosh! A red-hot ball of fire spouted out of the cave's mouth. Even crouching down as low as they could behind the jagged rocks, the fuzzbuzzers could feel the scorching heat. A sizzling sheet of flame went leaping up to the sky. Boom! The fuzzbuzzers felt the ground quiver and quake. Then hundreds of small stones came showering down on them. Very slowly, they raised their heads and peeped out. It was incredible. The cave had simply vanished. It had exploded into 1,000 fragments, and all that was left was a heap of rubble. The entire place was in a shambles. A thick black cloud floated upwards, and everything was coated by dry, powdery dust. Macfuzz stood up. He moved across to the mound of broken stone. He heard a faint gurgling sound, and when he looked down, he saw a trickle of red liquid oozing out from underneath the jumble of rock. He bent down to take a closer look. It was blood. Very slowly, the blood soaked into the ground. Soon it would have drained away forever, leaving just a brownish-coloured stain behind. The Snagron had been killed. She must have been crushed under the falling rocks. Macfuzz raised his dagger and waved to the rest of the clan.
I claim this victory for the Clan Macfuzz!
He shouted.
We have beaten the Snagron, and this is her grave!
The rest of the clan came crowding round.
Hooray!
They shouted.
The Snagron has gone forever!
Macfuzz inspected them all. Everyone was alive and well. Luckily, no one had been harmed when the gunpowder had exploded.
We should all count our blessings,
He said.
We've been very lucky indeed. Now I hope that the flowers and the birds will come back to live in the Glen of Gloom and drive all the wickedness away.
He looked up at the sky. Night was drawing in.
Well,
He said,
it's all over now. I suppose we should set off for home.
Beaming with happiness, the fuzzbuzzers set off on the long road home. There would be a fantastic party in the Glen Macfuzz tonight. They would have a big banquet with lots of food and drink. They were sure that the Snagron would never bother them again. But they had all forgotten something. Nobody remembered the snagron's nest of wood and clay floating around on the underground lake. Nobody remembered the 2 white eggs waiting to give birth to 2 more snagrons. Had they been smashed when the cliffs came tumbling down, or were they still there, safe and sound, inside their nest? One day, perhaps, the clan would find out. Read these questions and then write your answers neatly. Do not forget where to put capital letters and full stops. Question 1. Which 2 members of the clan had stayed up all night? Question 2. Why did Tosh keep his hands behind his back? Question 3. Why did the snagron think that her prisoners would have to come out of the cave in the end? Question 4. Draw the old wooden cart loaded up with things. Question 5. Why did Don want to take a lucky charm with him? Question 6. Draw Macfuzz dressed ready for battle. Question 7. How could the snagron tell that her prisoners had escaped? Question 8. How did the clan get rid of the Toadons? Question 9. What were the broomsticks for? Question 10. What was in the wooden barrels? Question 11. How could Macfuzz tell that the snagron had been killed? Question 12. Write a short story about what could happen next.